Thank you very much, Vicki. So, we're going to have a little talk today, a little bit of fun, if we can, talking about a topic that's really pertinent to our society, really pertinent to different age groups, and really a significant medical problem. Usually when I do one of these talks, I like to start out with a joke. There's no real good joke about skin cancer, that's for sure. It's not funny. So I'll just give you a joke that isn't about skin cancer. So I just think this is funny, and I don't know why, but this struck me as being funny. A guy walks into a doctor's office, sits down, says to the doctor, "I've lost so much weight that I feel invisible." And the doctor looks at him and says, "I'm sorry, I can't see you now." I think that's a funny joke. Anyways, and I like jokes. So if you guys come up with any jokes later, I'm happy to hear it. Okay? So we're going to talk today about skin cancer. And we want to say first that most people don't realize about the skin being an organ. And the skin is the largest organ in your body, as we see on the slide here. It's the first line of natural defense. It has many functions in your body. It regulates body temperature. It covers your organs. It stops infection from getting into your organs. And when the skin is violated, as you know, this infection can go from outside into vital body areas and that sort of thing. So the skin protects you, and it's also a body temperature regulation. When you sweat and everything, the skin cools, and when the skin cools, you can maintain your body temperature better. And it's made up of two main layers, and that's the epidermis and the dermis. We're not going to go into, you can change the next slide. We're not going to go into extreme details, okay, on this, because we want to get to the meat of the skin cancer talk and how we can prevent it and how we can help it. And you may be saying, well, you're not a dermatologist, so why are you talking about skin cancer? So that's exactly right. I'm a family practitioner. I've been in East Palestine for over 30 years now, even though I'm only 42. And that was hard to manage, but we've managed to do family practice for this period of time. In that time, we see a tremendous amount of skin cancer because we're the first line, we're the primary care doctor. So the idea of our practice is to detect things as they're going on, diagnose them, and get you to the appropriate specialist if there's a specialist that need be involved with the care of that particular problem. In this case, skin cancer is something I do on a daily basis as far as diagnosing, detecting, and just looking for it. And actually not only on a daily basis, but on a per patient basis. So just about every patient that comes in my office, and in our office, we don't do a lot of chief complaint medicine. We recently hired a nurse practitioner, and he said that Dr. Vrabel, my partner, took him into a patient and he said, "You want to see how I do an abdominal exam?" So he took him into the patient and he started with his ear, nose, and throat and did the exam all the way through his body, showed because the person had abdominal pain. And so Joey, our nurse practitioner, said, "Well, that's great." And then Dr. Vrabel said to him, "Do you want to see how I treat a patient with heart failure and heart problems?" And Joey said, "Yeah, sure." And so Dr. Vrabel took him in the room and he started with his otoscope and started going into his ears and nose and throat and examining the rest of his body. And so by the third time he said, "Do you want to see how I treat a patient for a leg injury?" And Joey says, "No, I think I got the right idea." So the idea is that we don't do a lot of chief complaint medicine. We examine people pretty thoroughly. I had a lady that came in once for a sore throat. I just hadn't seen her before. I hadn't seen her for 6 months to a year, so I did a full exam. Based on that exam, the poor lady did have an abdominal mass. She ended up with a hysterectomy. So the next time she came in, she said, this time I have a sinus infection, and you're not looking at anything below my neck, because I'm not having another surgery, because you wanted to examine everything. But that's more or less the way we operate. And so when people come in for other things, you may not know what the doctor's doing. And when we're training some of our nurse practitioners and our students, medical students that we have, we're showing them that when we're looking at, say, an ear, nose, and throat exam and they come in for a sore throat, I'm also checking axillas, I'm pulling up their shirt and checking their breathing, but while I'm doing that, especially in their back, I'm looking at their back. So what are we looking for? We're looking for skin cancer all the time on almost every patient in our practice. And we're finding these things, and oftentimes we'll say, hey, you got a bad mole here. I have a number of patients that never knew they had a mole, especially on their back. We'll talk about that more. That had melanomas there. So what is melanin, which is the skin pigment, and it's the primary determinant of skin color. And that's what changes from ultraviolet light and can be associated with malignant melanoma. So you have melanocytes in your skin, and they have melanin, it's a natural pigment, and usually 90%, 95% of the cases of skin cancer, there's other things, exposure to radiation, etc., but most of the skin cancer we're seeing is as a result of exposure to ultraviolet radiation, which is basically the sun, and it changes these cells that have the melanin in them. So skin cancer forms in the tissues of the skin and begins in the cells. And the cells are the small building blocks of nature that build up and make up the skin as a whole. But there's little microscopic entities called cells. And those cells make up every one of our organs and every one of, and all the area of the skin, and they make up every functioning thing in our body. And those cells have certain functions. Well, in the skin, they function as a group in the skin, and they have an orderly process. Old cells die, new cells take their place. And that occurs constantly. And it occurs in certain other organs in your body too. And we're not going to get into that because we're talking about skin. When the orderly process goes wrong, new cells form when the skin doesn't need them, or old cells do not die when they should, or the cells go crazy. Then those cells start to grow. Then those cells are basically called tumors and cancer. Now that's basically the idea of cancer. Cancer isn't the most profound difficulty to understand. And that's why there may not ever be a cure for cancer, because cancer is so many different things. And basically what happens is there's some trigger in the cell, and in this case we're saying that most of the time the trigger in the skin cancers that we see are triggered by the sun and by ultraviolet radiation. And that would be tanning beds, that would be sun, etc. But the cell has some type of trigger, and they don't know in all the different cancers what that trigger is. They found out now that if you talk about, say, cervical cancer in women, the trigger there is the HPV virus, and that is also a trigger in some mouth cancers at this particular point in time. And there's other viruses that seem to trigger cancer cells to form, or regular cells to form into cancerous cells. So it's not a terribly hard concept, the concept of cancer. It's the basic simple situation is a normal cell goes crazy, starts to multiply, and those cells that are in that trigger area start to multiply and form a cancer. And then that cancer can stay in one area, or it can spread to other parts of the body. So we're going to talk about, just with skin cancer now, just some facts. It's the most common form of cancer in the U.S. More than 3.5 skin cancers are diagnosed every year. Now the problem with the number of skin cancers that there are is that there is a registry that the doctors or the laboratories are supposed to report the numbers of melanoma. And they're also supposed to report squamous and basal cell cancers. But many of these cancers are done in doctors' offices that are, they're dermatopathologists. They do their own pathology in many cases. Sometimes it's questionable as to whether they're reporting all the cases of the skin cancer. So that we don't know exact figures on there. But there's more cases of skin cancer than the combined incidence of cancers in the breast, prostate, lung, and colon. Okay? Over the past 3 decades, more people have had skin cancer than all the other cancers combined. 1 in 5 Americans will develop skin cancer in the course of a lifetime. And I just received an alert on my email that says there's 9,000 cases of melanoma now each year, and they're starting to have a melanoma-type crisis in the number of cases. So we start out first with a thing called an actinic keratosis, which is a skin problem that can be noticed to be on all the parts of the body exposed to the sun, scalp, face, lips, hands, shoulders. And in the beginning, they're so small, they're felt like touch. So you can run your hand over the arm and or different places on your face, and you feel these kind of skin things sticking up, and they're not really so visible that you can feel them more than they're visible. And then they become, some of them become red, some of them are light and dark, tan, pink, and itch, and that sort of thing. And many times doctors will remove these. We can go to the next slide. And they'll remove these actinic keratoses so they don't become cancers, but those can turn into skin cancers. So there are some precursors of these skin cancers. There's also moles that can turn into skin cancers, and they'd be more your melanoma type of situation. And so we have 3 major types of the skin cancers, and that's melanoma, which forms in the melanocytes, the skin cells that make up the pigment. The basal cell cancer that forms in the basal cells, which are small round cells at the base and the outer level of the skin, and again, sun exposure makes those happen more. And squamous cell cancer, which forms in the squamous cells that are on the surface of the skin. So basically 3 types of cancer. We have a picture there of a superficial spreading melanoma. 70% of the melanomas are that type of melanoma. And it is usually a flat lesion that spreads over the skin surface, and it starts to become elevated, and it can progress to itching, bleeding, ulceration. Men versus women, more often found on the trunk, head and neck in men, and lower extremities in women. I have a number of women in my practice that have had melanomas on their legs. Now, the melanomas that form in the back of your eye, melanomas that form really weird places, I'm sorry for those. Those don't get detected as easy as they're kind of rare, but they do happen. They don't get detected as easy as, of course, the melanoma on your skin. And sometimes these melanomas do form in very strange places. And sometimes, of course, they're not subject to early detection. The overall 5-year U.S. survival rate is 98% when things are detected early, before the tumor is spread to lymph nodes or other organs. Survival rate falls to 62% when it reaches the lymph nodes, and only 15% when it metastasizes to distal organs. Now, still on melanoma, we account for less than 5% of skin cancer cases, but like I said, there's 9,000 now new cases a year. 9,000. That's a lot for just one division of skin cancer, which is less than 5% of the skin cancer cases in the United States. So you imagine how much skin cancer is going on. Of the 7 most common cancers, melanoma is the one whose incidence is increasing. And why are the other cancers not really increasing? Well, many of the cancers are being detected with screening. We now have colon cancer screening, which is being detected much earlier now when the colon tumors are just polyps. And all colon cancer pretty much is derived from polyps in your colon. So if you have colonoscopy, when you have polyps and those polyps are removed, 99% chance you're not going to get colon cancer as long as you continue to go on the regimen that's designed for that. So I'm a big believer in screening. I think screening for cancer is so important. We have now prostate cancer being found much earlier with PSA tests. And you may be seeing a lot, and we have, of course, we did pap smears, and we now have women's cervical cancer being found much earlier than what it was in maybe some years past. Now, there's a whole revolution going on in medicine right now, which I don't like. and I think it's wrong. Okay, and so what they're doing is doing, from what I could see, financial analyses, and they're saying, well, we shouldn't do pap smears anymore because it's not financially feasible. Of course, if you're the one with the cancer, then it was financially feasible for you.
Right.
But it's not financially feasible for the whole society. They're saying that we should do PSA tests on the patient on a yearly basis because it causes the patient to have more tests that maybe they don't need. Now, they don't mention all the people and they say, well, that the prostate cancer is a slow-growing cancer. Not the case in younger men. Not the case in whatever men you don't know. Because you don't know which case is slow. You don't know which case is aggressive. We have ways of telling whether the prostate cancer is spread, various other tests that we can do to tell that. But that PSA test is so important. It has saved so many lives in my practice alone. And